initiated their unconditional surrender on board the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay in September of 1945. I believe that this conflict will end when Ukraine negotiates its unconditional surrender, maybe in Kiev, maybe in Lvov, maybe somewhere else. But the idea that Russia's reaching out looking for a negotiated settlement is just patently absurd.
Yeah, and the reports from Reuters talk about how it's the United States that rejected such a ceasefire deal. And they cite that, or they don't even indicate, there's no indication of why, but there's a reference to Vladimir Putin was unwilling to cede territory. So I wonder if you can make sense of this because why
The
would
game
Vladimir
and watch it.
Putin
I
pick
really
up the phone or speak through intermediaries? They mentioned maybe Arab leaders, leaders from the Middle East, delegates, some kind of intermediary from these allied countries, so-called neutral countries. Why would he speak in any form about ceding territory? To me, that seems very strange, especially after this interview.
Well, first of all, Russia is a nation that's governed by the rule of law. People can complain about the imperfect manner in which Russia implements the rule of law. That's open for discussion. But understand this: the Russian Constitution is quite clear about how Russian territory is treated, and Russia has absorbed 5 new territories since 2014, Crimea in 2014, and then as a result of 4 referenda in September of 2022, they have Kherson, Zaporizhia, the Donetsk People's Republic, and Lugansk People's Republic. This is Russian territory. This is Mother Russia. This is holy Russia. No Russian president can negotiate this way. It's literally impossible. So the idea that Vladimir Putin calling up and we're going to give away some territory, we'll make concessions, it's absurd. It's wishful thinking. I think what it is that the Russian president, in his interview with Tucker Carlson, made it clear that Russia is willing to negotiate, but that they won't make any concessions on territory, for instance. And I think Reuters may have talked to somebody in the National Security Council who said that it's a non-starter because unless Russia is willing to make concessions on territory, because the U.S. has been whispering, we need to give them Crimea. Give them, they have it. You're not getting it back. No one's, it's Russian forever now. In exchange for what? You want Russia to give up Kherson? Can't. It's part of Russia. You want Russia to give up Zaporizhia? Can't. It's part of Russia. Give up Donetsk? Can't. Lugansk? Can't. Russia can't give anything up. It's like asking Russia to give up Vladivostok, St. Petersburg, Moscow. You can't. It's all Russia. It's Russian constitution. And the Russian president, no matter how powerful you think Vladimir Putin is, he literally cannot go and give up pieces of Russia. So the whole concept here is flawed. But again, I think what you're seeing with Russia is, it's sort of this indifference. Yeah, we're willing to negotiate, but since you're not, we're just going to take it by force. And there's nothing you can do to stop us.
Yeah, can you speak to it? Because this interview with Tucker Carlson, we haven't gotten the chance, I covered here on my channel, but we haven't gotten the chance to speak about it. It seems that this piece of information, this has been swirling for quite some time, this idea that Putin is signaling in some form for a negotiated settlement, for some kind of peace deal, that he is the one reaching out to his NATO counterparts or U.S. counterparts. But in this interview with Tucker Carlson, Putin was just so clear, and you said Putin broke the internet. The interview broke the internet. The level of sophistication of how Putin laid out Russia's, not just its position in this conflict, but why Russia has behaved the way it has toward NATO and the United States, was so clear that it would really take a lot of mental gymnastics to try to validate and verify now these reports coming out. It's almost like two different just come to, it's like Jack and I.
Hey, Drop Top, what's up? I was trying to get up.
So could you talk about
I was trying to
this
get the chat
interview,
up this
your
whole
reaction
time.
to it, and in particular Vladimir Putin and his articulation of Russia's actual position here, where this conflict has gone and is going, and where it's going.
Well, the interesting thing is when Tucker Carlson introduced the interview, he said, "Look, I'm going to show you this interview. When it starts, you're going to, I ask a question, and then the Russian president goes off on a 20, 30-minute expose, and I thought it was filibuster." Well, I mean, with all due respect, look, Tucker Carlson is not a Russian expert. He admits it. I mean, he makes no bones about it. He's new to the topic. I mean, he's an 8-day wonder. And what I mean by that is he went to Russia for 8 days, and suddenly he's been enlightened, which is good. It's a good thing. Anybody who travels to Russia in 8 days would be enlightened, especially Moscow, a huge city that's got wonderful infrastructure, clean, everything works. There's no American city that is the equivalent of Moscow. No European city is the equivalent of Moscow. Moscow is unique. St. Petersburg is unique. Tucker didn't go there. But my point is, his job was to bring Vladimir Putin's voice to 1 billion people. And he succeeded. I mean, and in that, there's no one else in the world that could have done what Tucker Carlson did. So he needs to be applauded. But we need to make sure we understand. Tucker Carlson didn't understand hardly anything that Vladimir Putin was telling, especially the history. Vladimir Putin spent a long time going through the history of the formation of Russia and, the concept of Ukraine and why he believes it's an artificial construct. But in doing so, he said some things that a Russian historian or somebody who was, capable of putting into the proper context what Putin was saying, it set off a light bulb. Prior to this interview, Vladimir Putin, made a president answer a question to somebody, and he basically said that Odessa is a Russian city. Odessa, of course, being the Ukrainian controlled city with a majority Russian population, at least through history, on the Black Sea, the major seaport of Ukraine today. He said it's a Russian city. They feel the same way about Kharkov in the north. They feel the same way about Dnipropetrovsk in the center, Mykolaiv, just to the northwest of Odessa. Russian cities. Why am I saying this? Because throughout his historical discussion, class, we just call it class, he's given us a class in Russian history, he kept talking about the right bank and the left bank of the Dnieper River. And he kept saying things like the right bank, had the history of Austro-Hungarian involvement, nascent Ukrainian nationalism, things of that nature. But the left bank was always Russia. The left bank was always Russia. And he kept going back and forth. The left bank is Russia. He said back then we called it the new territories. What do they call it today? The new territories. And as he kept going through and making this emphasis, it became clear that Vladimir Putin was saying that this conflict doesn't end until all of New Russia is part of Russia. And so all these people say that Vladimir Putin's calling around saying, I want to give you back territory. You didn't listen to what he was saying. What I was hearing from him is Odessa is a Russian city and will be a Russian city. Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, Kharkov, these are Russian cities. The left bank of the Dnieper River is New Russia, and has always been and will continue to be. And that's what I heard. And I think most students of Russian history, most people who study Vladimir Putin's speeches, would agree with me. In fact, I haven't found anybody who disagrees with me yet on this one, anybody who's knowledgeable about Russia. And this puts the whole Reuters, Putin calling up to give away territory thing to bed, because it's impossible. Putin was saying the exact opposite thing during this that 30-minute history lesson was literally, I mean, I will tell you this. If I were in the CIA and I used to work with the CIA back when they were Soviet, in the Cold War, when they were Soviet analysis. The best Russian Soviet analysts in the world, they would have gathered around and they would have had a round table where people would take him apart and they would have gone through everything he said, and the conclusion would have been, and they would have written the paper straight to the President of the United States. Vladimir Putin is signaling that he is going to capture 4 new territories before this war ends. That would have been the paper. And the CIA would have put it in front of the President and said, this is sort of what's going to happen. Now, maybe the CIA is doing that today. I don't know. It's been so politicized that, they can't. Maybe the CIA has been given talking points that you can't do anything that promotes a Russian point of view, that your job is actually to promote something. Yeah, we saw that, for instance, with Saddam Hussein in weapons of mass destruction. Nobody in the CIA went around and said, hey, UNSCOM, the United Nations, for doing this job. They account for 95%. Every word coming out of the Iraqi government is they don't have these weapons. There's no indication that they do have these weapons. Maybe they don't have the weapons. The CIA wasn't even allowed to consider that point. All they could consider was Saddam is hiding weapons, even though there was no evidence that he was doing so. So we know that the CIA can be corrupted by politicization. I imagine that the Russia's mission center today is corrupted in the same way. They are ordered that you can't do anything that promotes a Russian point of view, even if that's your job, is to be accurate about what the Russian point of view is. You actually have to take the intelligence and shape it so that it supports American policy objectives. So I don't know if they sat down and took that apart, but Tucker should have known this. My one frustration with Tucker is that he was not prepared for this interview. He was not prepared at all. He had the questions he wanted to ask, but to be honest, he didn't even know why he wanted to ask them, because he couldn't ask any effective follow-up questions. He was confused about the history lesson because he didn't take the time to study Russian history and to put it in perspective, to understand what Putin was talking about, left bank, right bank. And you saw this with the totality of the interview, all the way up to the concluding question about Evan Gershwin, the Wall Street Journal journalist. And Tucker should never have asked that question, because had Tucker done his due diligence, done his homework, he would have known that there is a very good likelihood that Evan is a CIA non-official covered asset. And Putin sort of schooled him on it. I mean, if not, why is the CIA in active negotiations with the Russian intelligence service to service, about getting Evan back? If Evan was just a journalist, the CIA would not be engaged in this fashion. This would be the State Department's job. But the CIA is involved. Why? It's a CIA asset. Putin was basically saying that. The services are involved. We'll let the services handle this one. But Tucker was ill prepared. But again, I don't think it was his job to be prepared for this interview. I think it was his job to have the interview, let Putin speak, and let those words be heard by a billion people. And in that, Tucker succeeded.
Yeah, I mean, if even just studying Vladimir Putin's speeches, what he has said about Russia, about Ukraine, about the region, about Russia's history, it's no secret that Vladimir Putin likes to talk about history. So that should have been expected to at least some degree, and perhaps approached differently. So definitely agree.
And he also missed some. It wasn't just about history though, because you have to combine. Okay, let's say you had a bingo card. Let's say we played Carlson Putin interview bingo card. Who on the bingo card would have said Dostoevsky? Not too many people. But if you know Vladimir Putin, if you've been studying it, if you've been studying Russia, you know that the Russian soul factors into everything Russia does. And Vladimir Putin is a Russian president. So he is concerned about the Russian soul, He explained more about Russia and the Russian people in this briefing than, again, most people picked up on. Dostoevsky, the Russian soul. I mean, go read the Brothers Karamazov. How many people in this audience know who the Grand Inquisitor is? Understand the importance of that. The concept of good versus evil. The role of redemption. my God, what a deep presentation Putin provided. He talked about the brain, the two parts coming together. But in the end, his final words were, you cannot separate the Russian soul from the Russian people. I mean, listen to the man. I make fun of it. I mean, I feel like, you've seen Apocalypse Now, and the scene when Martin Sheen shows up in the boat when you finally get to Colonel Kurtz's camp, and who's the actor? Dennis Hopper comes out. He's the journalist, and he's talking about Kurtz. He's crazy, man. He's brilliant. He's crazy. I mean, that's how I felt after watching the Putin interview. I'm just like, oh God, I'm on Dennis Hopper here, because holy cow, it burst my brain. The depth of what he was saying. That he was speaking on so many different planes, but nobody got it. Nobody got it. But the beauty of it is it's captured for posterity, and people will get it. People will go back and watch this thing over and over and over again and extract knowledge. People are already starting to ask questions. People are already starting to say, why aren't we negotiating with this man? What is the problem here? Tucker embarrassed himself about, I felt at one point in time that he'd never get out of the boat. I'm sorry, I'm reading your comments. I was told by my wife, never read comments, but man, but the thing is, I got distracted, but no, Tucker, asked. I thought a couple times Putin was going to just reach out and slap him, like,
Yes.
what, especially when Tucker, like an idiot, with total. I mean, my God, if you had done your homework, you would have known never to say this. But the Nazis were 80 years ago. I mean, that was, dude. I will tell you right now, Tucker, you should have called me up. I would have told you that in May, when I was there for the Victory Day celebration, when I went to all of the museums, I went to all of the memorials. I mean, one of the most touching museums was actually in Sevastopol. There's a fortress there that held out, finally had to surrender, and most of the people in there died. But you're in there, and they have a room, and you go in there, and it's sun, and then you see the stars, and then you see the faces of the people, and the constellation is talking to you. The constellation are the faces of the 27 million looking down on you, saying, do not forget us. Do not bring shame to our memory. Never forget what we died for. This is ingrained into the soul of every Russian. Literally. I mean, Americans often roll their eyes. Why? Because we don't celebrate World War II victory anymore. When was the last time we had a national holiday? I mean, if we do celebrate, we're going to bring out the beer, pop the beer, do the barbecue, get drunk, play loud music and all that. Victory Day is a solemn day. These people they have the damn immortal regiment, where, because all the veterans had died now, the veterans used to march, but now, they're all 100 years old. What they do is millions of Russians come to the street on Victory Day with photographs of their ancestors who fought in the war, not just died, but fought, people who served their nation, and they march. The immortal regiment, the memory will never die, the memory will never die, the memory will never die. And Tucker Carlson said, well, it was 80 years ago. Tucker, you shouldn't have said that, man. Putin almost snapped your neck off. I mean, he leaned in there and he said, I think he said it's an interesting question, but it's a disgusting question, because disgusting, it means you don't know what you're talking about. You just insulted the entire Russian nation. And again, Tucker's job wasn't to go in there and be a PhD. His job was exactly what he accomplished. Again, nobody else in the world at this point in time could have done what Tucker did to bring the attention. I mean, he had the help of Elon Musk and X, but the point is, 300 million, the number may approach 1 billion by the time this is done. I mean, come on, man, that's unprecedented, and Tucker deserves all the credit in the world. But Putin, throughout this interview, was just looking at him. I mean, look at the body language of Putin. He's just sitting there going, you didn't.
The faces, I mean, you could literally take screenshots almost every couple of seconds, and it would, just meme-worthy, because Putin's face was so, I mean, he's a very animated, charismatic speaker when he is in his element, but at the same time, yeah, there were just many opportunities for him to make a lot of interesting faces, given what he was being.
And the thing that I've learned about the Russians in interacting with them is they're very particular. They don't expect me to be a PhD. All right? I mean, and I'll talk with them, and you can see them going, you got that about 80% right, sir. You got to work on the last 20%. But that's the important thing. You showed us enough respect to actually try and learn about this. And we respect you for it. We appreciate you for that. We appreciate the effort. You made an effort. That's all they want. They want to be respected. Not to be worshipped, not for us to fall on our knees and pray, but just to say, hey, I respect you enough to try and learn your history and to try and put it in a proper perspective. Tucker Carlson was so disrespectful in this interview. Now he'll claim he wasn't, but I'll counter that he was, because you're interviewing the president of Russia. It's sort of like the biggest interview of modern times. But you weren't prepared. You didn't do your homework. You didn't show them the respect. You couldn't put their history in a proper perspective. You couldn't comprehend their history. You couldn't ask appropriate follow-on questions. And you lost control of the interview. The Russian president took control of the interview and basically laid out the message he wanted to give out. But it was your job as the interviewer to extract that from the president, but you didn't. The president took control of it, and he gave you the material, which is good, because your job was to get the voice heard, and you succeeded. But I don't claim to be the world's greatest expert on Vladimir Putin, but I can say that I've watched him enough interacting. His body language was just basically saying, you invited me to the party for this, you didn't do your homework. Is this all you got? I mean, literally, he was just looking at him like, no, you told me that this is like, have you ever seen that movie, Heaven Can Wait, Warren Beatty? It's a classic movie, but basically he's a football player who gets hit by a bike, or he's on a bike, gets hit by a car, but the angel pulls his body out too soon and assumes he's dead. But it wasn't his time. He would have survived that, but his body got cremated. So now they find him a body. And long story short is he wanted to get back and play football. So he was a billionaire, so he bought the football team, and then he got to try it. Okay, so he's at the tryout. Now, at the tryout, in order to win it, he has to show up and actually be physically fit, know the plays, know the stuff. And he showed up and he did it. Putin felt like he was the coach of that football team, the Los Angeles Rams, and Tucker Carlson was saying, hey, I want to try out. Give me a chance. So he gave him the shot. Tucker Carlson came there, and he was on a pogo stick with a clown face, saying, I'm ready to play NFL quarterback. And Putin's like, no, you're not. You told me you wanted this interview. My God, 3 years you've been asking for this interview, saying you want this interview. We gave you the interview. This is what you bring to the table? A pogo stick and a clown mask? You didn't bring NFL quality football skills? I don't know. I can't speak for the Russian president. I don't pretend to, but just his body language alone was just like, no, man, you didn't do your job.
Yeah, there were certainly some moments of that interview where I felt like Putin was in that situation where, you've been invited to a party, but you really haven't wanted to go to any parties that you were invited to by this particular person or group of people. Then you finally go and you're like, I shouldn't have come, because especially the moment where he was asked about China, there were a few moments where he's asked about China, where in both instances the insinuation was that either China is not feared by the United States, but the United States fears Russia, or that China is replacing the United States, or the unipolar West, collective West, in the BRICS formation. And in both of those instances, I feel like Putin was definitely that one where you're just like, this is really the question you're going to ask, because it's not so difficult to understand the China-Russia relationship, even if you know, even all the things that you just mentioned, Scott, notwithstanding the history, understanding Russia, even if you don't understand any of that, you just do some cursory research, you understand that Russia has a very different viewpoint than that. So to even ask that question is
But I
interesting.
also hope that Tucker took the following lesson away, because I saw him in Dubai. I think it was yesterday. He was speaking at Dubai, and he said, I mean, he's what I call an 8-day wonder. I mean, he went to Russia for 8 days, and suddenly he's been on the road, which is good. But hey, Tucker, what would happen if you went to China? I mean, you're sitting here, you're such a xenophobe. You hate China. You're trying to pit China against Russia and all this stuff. Negative, negative, negative. Do you think for a moment, Tucker, that if you went to China and gave China 8 days, interviewed Xi Jinping, maybe, do you think your mind would be blown? I mean, high-speed trains, they actually work in China. There's a whole bunch of them. Clean infrastructure. I mean, I just think that, Tucker, if he's truly open-minded, his next step should be to go to China. I think he was crudely trying to create a situation where he could pit Russia against China. There's some sort of neoconservative fantasy of
Which is weird, which is strange because you're with Vladimir Putin, who is not going to entertain that to go to interview, but continue.
No, I mean, Putin's like, we don't get to pick our neighbors. China's our neighbor, whether you want it to be or not. They're there, and we just happen to be getting along great right now. We talked about trade, balancing trade, because that's one of the big things. I mean, you saw this with and Tucker Carlson. I apologize, Tucker, if you're watching. I don't mean to be picking on you. You did a great job. Could have done better, but you did a great job. But, Joe Biden did the same thing. Listen, remember when Joe Biden met with Vladimir Putin back in June of 2021 in Geneva in the lead up to this whole special military operation trying to talk? And then his press conference afterwards, well, I shouldn't talk, but I'll talk about it anyways. I told Putin, man, you don't want to do this, that China's big and they're going to take over your economy and you need to come over to us. You need to break apart. And, I'm just sitting there going, didn't the CIA brief you on anything of us? I mean, why would you say something so utterly stupid? I mean, I know by just watching Russian news that Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping actually like each other. They actually attend each other's birthday celebrations. They make pancakes together. They have real conversations, human to human conversations. It's not superficial like the kind of crap you pull on them. And if you think that your little statement there in Geneva was going to suddenly make Vladimir Putin go, oh, damn, I should have had a V8. You're right. Hey, Lavrov, terminate everything with China. We ain't doing it now. No. I'm going over to America because Joe Biden showed me the light. It's just stupid. It shows a lack of sophistication, a lack of comprehension, a lack of understanding. And no one even considers the fact that, let's say you're the Chinese. You're looking at how the West is posturing against Russia going, if you remove the word Ukraine and put the word Taiwan, that's the same thing they're doing to us. And if we let them get away with it with Russia, they're going to turn around and try to do it with us. So the place to stop the West right now is Ukraine. And China has finally come to the realization. I mean, their new defense minister came out and said, we're with Russia all the way on. There's no data. Because in the past they were like, we like the Russian, but Ukraine, Westphalian principles, we can't, not anymore. China went, we're with Russia 100% on Ukraine. 100%. There's no daylight. Because they recognize, finally China realizes that what the West tried to do to Russia through Ukraine is exactly what they're trying to do to China through Taiwan. And again, the CIA's job is to know this. The CIA's job is your job as an intelligence officer is never to tell your boss what they want to hear. That's not your job at all. That's what a PR person does. A campaign manager. Job as an intelligence officer is to put the harsh truth on the table. Say, these are the facts. Now, you do with them as you wish. You shape policy around the facts, but the facts are the facts. I can't sit here and tell you something that isn't backed up by reality. I'm here to give you reality, and the reality is Russia and China, like this, man, they complete each other.
Yeah, that's That's 100% true. And, you know, I mean, the interview, as you said, it was a really great opportunity. You know, for all of my criticisms, my suspicions of, my criticisms of Tucker Carlson, that he did this at all and that it turned out the way it did was a huge service. So I definitely acknowledge that. But of course, we saw so many examples of how even when you're in the room with someone of the stature of Vladimir Putin, that high level kind of interview, it's hard to shed that American exceptionalist baggage. There was a lot of baggage that was brought in there. And I think the amazing thing was that Vladimir Putin showed just how prepared he is as a leader. While you have Kamala Harris and all of these the spokespeople for the Biden administration having to scream at the top of their lungs that Biden's memory is okay, Biden is okay, everything is going okay, you don't have to worry about Joe Biden, as he's mistaking the Egyptian president with the Mexican president, and just having one memory lapse after another. Vladimir Putin just was interviewed in what was supposed to be, I don't think it was that tough of an interview, but at the same time, it is a risk to go to the Western media of any kind, even an independent now like Tucker Carlson, and go there and just give the Russian perspective. It is something that obviously takes a lot of care, and it's a huge decision. And the fact that Putin did that and just hit the ball out of the park without seemingly even trying, I think just shows the vast differences of where Russia is right now and where the United States is. And so, anyway, last reactions to this interview.
Well, let me just say this. I don't know how Tucker prepared for this, to be honest. I mean, he hasn't told us how he prepared for it. He is a professional. Tucker may have done this on purpose. May have.
Naskin, what's going on, man? Thanks.
Done this, to this ill-prepared interview to give Putin a chance to say what Putin wanted to say. Because Tucker's questions were sophomoric. They were simple. But I don't think so. I think Tucker thought that he was prepared. I'll tell you who was prepared. Vladimir Putin. Again, as someone who's been a Putin watcher for 20 plus years, look what Putin did with Angela Merkel. He knew she didn't like dogs. And so Putin comes in, all friendly, and he brings his dog. He has his dog hanging out by her, and she's uncomfortable. He threw her a rock. But it's a test. Because if she's a pro, yeah, the dog's there, she's uncomfortable. But now, by being uncomfortable, Putin gets to test her to see how prepared she is, how she performs under pressure. I mean, the guy wasn't a KGB agent for nothing. I'm not saying that that's how he approaches everything. It's standard practice. If you're a good politician, every politician tests people. They come in, they grab your hand, the grip of the hand, they pull you in to see how you're doing. They'll put you in an uncomfortable situation to see how you respond. It's a test. And you saw Putin, Tucker asked this question. What the first thing Putin did? Took control of the interview by telling a long history lesson. Now, if Tucker was prepared, instead of interrupting and talking about the relevance of this, he would have come in with a question, and Putin would have went, aha, did his homework. Okay, now he's back. Boom. Now we're boxing. Okay, because he came in, gave me his jab. I pushed in. I got him in the corner. He comes back with a question. Now we're boxing. Now we're talking. Now I'm going to do this, and Putin would have respected that. But instead, what Putin did is basically said, screw it, Tucker. I'm bringing the dog in the room. You know when he did it. I heard you applied for the CIA, but they didn't take you.
Yes, yeah,
Tucker,
yeah.
Right at that point in time,
His
Tucker,
face, stone face. He did not want to touch that.
That was the end of Tucker's controlling the interview. And from that moment on, Putin took charge, which is what Putin did. He realized that the guy couldn't box, so he hit him, and then Putin just went on and gave his edge. He kept going. You got anything else for me? Because at that point in time, Putin got bored. To be honest, Putin's just like, I thought you said we'd have a serious conversation. You got anything else for me? Anything else you want to ask? I mean, come on, man, do something. So this was Vladimir Putin's interview, not Tucker Carlson's interview. Vladimir Putin took, and that's important because again, what Tucker did is give Vladimir Putin a stage, an international stage, hundreds of millions of viewers so far, more to come, and people are responding to this interview in a positive way. By the way, Tucker Carlson was getting ovations in Dubai, ovations, and I can guarantee you, when he comes back to America, he's going to be getting ovations too. He has scared the living crap, excuse my language, out of the establishment, because the last thing the establishment wanted was for Vladimir Putin's words not only to be heard, but to resonate. And now Americans who are realizing that they've been lied to by the Biden administration, by the Trump administration, by everybody about Russia. They've been lied to. We're sitting there going, wait a minute, we need to recalibrate. This recalibration is scaring the crap out of the Democrats and, frankly speaking, the Republicans. I will tell you this, I don't know Mike Johnson, I can't speak for him, but I think that he is sleeping a lot easier today about not bringing, not giving the Ukraine aid bill a chance. He says dead on arrival. Why? What gives him the confidence to do that? I think what gives him the confidence to do that is the realization that Biden's got nothing. That Ukraine is a dying issue. That there isn't an overwhelming number of Americans. Tucker Carlson's interview, I believe, is a liberating factor there because while Johnson is, you saw, I forget who the senator was, the guy that was holding up the votes for all the generals for a while. But he said, based on Tucker Carlson's interview, we see Putin is open to negotiations. So why aren't we negotiating instead of giving $64 billion to continue this war? Why aren't we doing it? People are starting to think. People are starting to ask questions. And that was the brilliance of what Tucker Carlson accomplished here.
Yeah, definitely. And Tucker Carlson's interview, the immense interest in it alone is pressure enough because it shows just so starkly in an election year. I mean, every year is an election year in the United States, it feels like, but in a key election year, it's obvious that interview, the energy around it, the fact that it's already not in 100, 150, however many plus million views ongoing, that's pressure enough to demonstrate people in the United States, the collective West, but if we're just talking about the United States, aren't that interested in the ongoing quagmire the United States continues to place itself in Ukraine. But yet they're very interested when given the opportunity to hear the other side, which shows that maybe there's more interest in the other side than is allowed
Hey, what's up, Noah?
to be generated. And that alone, for me, feels like political pressure.
This
that
project is on
class
hiatus.
understands.
What's up?
Maybe the neocons
Can you guys
understand
properly
it,
hear the show?
but certainly those
No, not you.
who are
I'm talking to the
using
guys on the
whether
stream.
they're genuine or not. I don't always think that Republicans are genuine about the Ukraine question, but they understand that to align with their counterparts on Ukraine at this juncture with regard to funding is political suicide. So that's enough
Good.
to align and go, and it runs parallel to that interest in Putin's interview. Any final thoughts on that before we move on?
No, I agree with you. I think we beat this horse enough.
All right, so Scott, there's also there's a few things I wanted to also get to. Perhaps we can move on to some of the nuts and bolts of what's happening.
I'm watching the chat, guys. So if you have any questions based on what you're hearing, please ask. I'll give some insight.
In the House, but there's all sorts of hoopla, of course, around the passage in the Senate of this major $60+ billion Ukraine funding bill, which I think is $100+ billion for the 3 wars that the United States finds itself in Asia, Gaza, and Ukraine. But you mentioned the huge issues that Ukraine is experiencing on the battlefield. All eyes right now are on Avdiivka. It appears that the Western mainstream media is conceding heavily that Avdiivka is very close to a Bakhmut type situation of going in Russia's favor, that the situation for Ukraine is terrible. And there's also the political issue, and to comment on this, Zaluzhny is gone. Valery Zaluzhny, he's gone. Now you have the butcher of Bakhmut, Alexander Syrskyi. And as this literal figure who's responsible in Bakhmut for sacrificing many, many Ukrainian soldiers to the point where the Politico, this rag of the Western mainstream media, is reporting that Ukrainian soldiers are telling them they are FUCKED because of this guy coming in. He is now saying that Ukraine is changing its strategy. Breaking news. It is now only interested in holding the line. So, Scott, help us make sense of this situation, these contending but interrelated developments.
Well, first of all, let's talk about Zaluzhny. He's a popular general, popular amongst the Ukrainian forces and popular amongst the West. He was the face of Ukraine at the Ramstein contact group in Germany, where Ukraine would meet with NATO, European allies, and convince them to basically turn over $150+ billion worth of assistance, military assistance, equipment, training, money, etc. He was very good at what he did. He wasn't the battlefield commander. The battlefield commander was the commander of the ground forces. That was Syrskyi. So Zaluzhny's job was to create the conditions for a Ukrainian victory, to give Syrskyi the equipment, the manpower, etc., that he needed to prevail on the battlefield. Syrskyi has a mixed record. In 2014, he was the commander of the Ukrainian army in the Battle of Deboltseve or something of this nature in northern Donetsk, near the Donetsk-Lugansk border. Basically, a couple thousand Ukrainian soldiers got surrounded by the Russians in early 2015, late 2014, early 2015. Vladimir Putin has talked about this battle, and he said that the biggest mistake he made was not terminating the Ukrainian army at that point. He said we could have done it. We haven't. All we had to do is just finish the job, kill them all, and that would have been the end of the Ukrainian army, and that would have been the end of the problem with Donetsk and Lugansk. It would have solved itself. But France and Germany intervened. Hollande, the president of France, Merkel, the chancellor of Germany, came in and begged Putin not to allow this slaughter to take place. And so thus was born Minsk II. And Putin says he regrets this because the West clearly wasn't negotiating in good faith. As Merkel and Hollande admit today, there was a sham. They were just buying time to rebuild the Ukrainian army to get in position to finish the job on Ukrainian terms. But Syrskyi was the commander there. He got a reputation for being very aggressive and getting the Ukrainian armies butt in a sling, which was too aggressive. Syrskyi was the ground commander for the defense of Kiev. I'm not going to denigrate him. Clearly the Russians didn't take Kiev. I don't think Russians were trying to take Kiev. Russia was doing a political maneuver trying to get Ukraine to the negotiation table. So Syrskyi's accomplishments in Kiev, had to be taken with a grain of salt. Russia wasn't pushed back from Kiev. Russia voluntarily withdrew from Kiev as part of the terms of the discussion. Putin mentioned this in the interview. Syrskyi also was in command of the Kharkov offensive in the summer and fall of 2022, after the Ukrainian army had been rebuilt with $48 billion of U.S. Lend-Lease money, equipment, European equipment. And the Russian army had, again, withdrawn from large swaths of territory, and over 50% of their forces in the Kharkov region had likewise withdrawn to Russia for refitting. So the Ukrainians attacked. Maybe the Russians should have been better prepared, but Syrskyi was able to push the Russians out of Kharkov to their current defensive positions. But in doing so, he lost a lot of men. That 60,000 man army that NATO had built up was eviscerated, and they had to build the army up again. Then Syrskyi engaged in Bakhmut. Many people were saying, "Hey, just give the Russians Bakhmut, pull back to the high ground, and dig in and save these lives. We need these lives for the summer counteroffensive." Summer counteroffensive wasn't supposed to be 90,000; it was supposed to be 160,000 troops, but 70,000 got butchered in Bakhmut by Syrskyi. Both the defense of Bakhmut, and once Bakhmut fell, the continuous attacks to try and recapture it that cost tens of thousands of Ukrainian lives. Syrskyi's responsible for that. Syrskyi, of course, was the ground forces commander for the failed counteroffensive. The name Butcher comes because he's very aggressive, and he doesn't shy away from throwing away life. Zelensky liked Syrskyi. You see, one of the problems that Zelensky had with Zaluzhny was that in December of last year, Zaluzhny gave an interview with The Economist, I believe, where he said, "Look, we've reached a stalemate." And Zelensky's going, "You can't use that word. It doesn't matter what reality is. My job is to go out and get nations to give us equipment. And they're only going to give us equipment if they think that by doing so, we can fulfill their fantasy of strategically defeating Russia, which requires us to be aggressive on the battlefield to inflict harm on Russia so Russia suffers losses so that there can be a political collapse of the Putin government. We need to be aggressive, aggressive, aggressive." And Zelensky's going, "We can't. We don't have anything left. We've thrown it all away. We're done. We have to go. It's a stalemate. We need to go over on the defensive." And so, Zelensky also viewed Zaluzhny as a political threat. Zaluzhny was saying, "Maybe I could do a better job." There's some leaked conversations where Zaluzhny allegedly says things about Zelensky that aren't very flattering, but he clearly has a low opinion of the Ukrainian president. And the rumor was that he believed he could do a better job. If there was going to be an election that there should have been in March, Zelensky might have beat Zelensky at the polls. So Zelensky had his the crosshairs on Zelensky for some time to get rid of him. And finally, he decided it was time to pull the trigger. Zelensky was no longer the general who was able to fulfill the vision set forth by Zelensky. This created a crisis because when he first tried to fire Zelensky said no. Now, in civil military relations in a democracy, when the civilian leadership tells the military, "You're done, step aside," the only answer is, "Sir, yes, sir." We've seen this in American history. General McClellan thought he could fight the war better than Abraham Lincoln. But when Lincoln fired him, McClellan said, "Yes, sir." He stood away. Douglas MacArthur thought he was a hell of a lot smarter than Harry Truman during the Korean War, wanted to have nuclear war against China. And Truman said, "Nope, you're fired," and MacArthur stepped aside. So now Zelensky has his vision of the war. Clearly, Zelensky doesn't agree with it. Zelensky said, "You're fired," and Zelensky said no. Not only did he say no, then he went and brought in one of these senior Azov types, a right sector guy, gave him a medal, and took a picture in his office. Stepan Bandera's photograph behind him, and the right sector flag. And the clear signal was, "Hey, these are the guys that I hang out with, and if you want to fire me, you're going to have to deal with these guys." And so there was a crisis. Victoria Nuland had to fly in and do a lot of work behind the scenes.
Give them some cookies, maybe, yeah.
Hand out some cookies and pay some. And at the end of the day, Zelensky stepped aside, and Syrskyi came in. But what's interesting is, Syrskyi was saying, we're going to go on the immediate counteroffensive in Avdiivka to try and, push to stall the Russian attack. Well, today he says, no, we've gone over on the exact same strategy that Zelensky was saying that they needed to do. Syrskyi's now doing, because reality is reality. And but the difference is, I think when Victoria Nuland engaged, I think there was a coming to minds between Zelensky and the Americans now about the direction this war is taking. I think even the Americans are telling Zelensky, "Hey, stop with the fantasy of achieving a battlefield victory. We can't. We got nothing left to give you." He said, "Let me tell you something, Zelensky. That money ain't coming out of Congress anytime soon. All right? I mean, even if if Mike Johnson said no, it's dead on arrival, the Democrats are saying, we're going to try a parliamentarian, maneuver. It takes 30 days to get to that point. In 30 days, Ukraine is going to lose 50 to 60,000 more men. They don't have anybody else coming in. So Syrskyi is doing what Zelensky was saying he wanted to do, but now Zelensky supports it because Zelensky understands that he can't allow fantasy to govern his actions, that the reality of the battlefield has to match the political reality that he has to get his allies to accept the fact that the best thing Ukraine can hope for right now is a stalemate. The stalemate that Zelensky was articulating back in December. But the problem is, this isn't a stalemate. It's a rout. This is the collapse of the Ukrainian military, and there's nothing anybody can do to change it, which now brings us back to the earlier story that you had about Reuters. The Reuters article isn't about anything that Putin did. The Reuters article is about the panic within the West about how do we find an off-ramp. And they're putting ideas out there that are fantasy, but what it's doing is it's creating the notion of a negotiated settlement. It's saying that this war won't end with Ukraine regaining its 1991 territories, pushing Russia out of Crimea. This war will end only through a negotiated settlement, and probably one that gives Russia all the territories that it currently possesses, and that the best bet Ukraine can have is to hope that by suing for peace early on, they get to retain the four that Vladimir Putin has indicated are part of the new Russia concept.
Yeah. There's just.
I don't think Danny actually is even paying attention to anything that what's his name saying.
It's almost as if there's this broad recognition now, especially in the United States' political class, that this conflict isn't going the way that they imagined it would go, or maybe I've thrown around the idea that maybe they didn't imagine it to go anywhere, any certain direction. There was hopes, maybe there were aspirations. However, there might have been an understanding among some in the blob of the foreign policy establishment that it's not so easy to take down Russia, and that then gets me thinking, well, okay, well, if you say Putin wants a peace deal, then one day, sometime in the near future, you say, we agree. You can try to frame it as, oh, this was Putin's idea. Putin came to us. We didn't come to him. We were strong this whole time. And look, Ukraine did better than we imagined. Because that's another narrative out there now. Ukraine has done better than we could have ever thought. Look at what they've been able to do. They've been able to hold the line. They've been able to push Russian forces back. Look at how strong Russia is compared to Ukraine, how big it is compared to Ukraine, and yet Ukraine stood up to Russia. That's another big narrative. So, on the other hand, though, you also have various Western media publications, I believe Business Insider, the latest, saying things are really bad for Ukraine, and there really is no ceasefire or peace deal or anything in sight. So, Scott, could you just delineate a little bit what actually is happening right now on the battlefield? I know Avdiivka is really where everyone's eyes are, but at the same time, I know that there's a broader situation that this all points to.
Look, the way this war was, the positional war, one of the things that made it difficult is the weaponry that both sides have, the precision artillery, the drones, etc., make it difficult to mass your forces. And so the battlefield is defined by a series of small unit engagements, fighting for tree lines, fighting for a height, fighting for a corner of a village, and you amass the force necessary with the supporting arms to take that piece of land, and then what happened immediately is the other side counterattacks, and if they counterattack with sufficient support, they push you back, and so you were basically having the C-sign operation taking place, and no movement on the battlefield. What Russia was doing was creating the conditions there where they were killing more Ukrainians than Ukrainians were killing Russians, but still the battlefield didn't move very much because Ukraine had sufficient manpower. Again, I just want to point out that according to Zelensky, Ukraine has about 880,000 men under arms. Now, he made that statement about a month ago, and given the casualty rate, say 40, 50,000, I'd say that they have 830,000 men under arms today. And next month, they'll have 780,000 men under arms. And then the next month, they'll have 720,000 men under arms. Because they're not getting any more manpower. They're losing stuff. And now you realize, while that's a large number of men, they've got to man a huge frontage, and they've got to protect against potential incursion from Belarus. They have to screen off, the Transnistria region, and suddenly that's not a lot of men anymore. And the more casualties you suffer, the thinner your lines get, and you don't have the forces necessary to do these counterattacks. So what's happening right now, and it's happening right now as we speak, Russia's continuing the same intensity. They're taking this tree line, they're taking this city block, they're taking this height, as they did in the past. But this time the Ukrainians aren't counterattacking, because they can't. So Russia now holds this line. And then the next day, they take another tree line, they take another city block, they take another height. Every day, 500 meters, 1.5 kilometers. It's not huge. These aren't 20-kilometer thrusts. These are just little chunks. But the Ukrainians can't counterattack. They can't hold. And the thing about that positional warfare is, because the defenses are done in depth, as you penetrate a defensive line, you get stopped, and then you get pushed back to your line. So the front never changed. Russia's now breaking through the Ukrainian defenses, and there's no coherent defense behind. And so the Russian, instead of going tree line, the reason why you go tree line is that you have defenses able to, provide, supporting fire, crossfires, etc. So you can't bite off too much, or else you're going to get hit on flanking fires. There's no more artillery. The drones don't fly for the Ukrainians well anymore, because Russia has been killing the drone operators, and Russia's just biting off these big chunks. And Adviivka's falling because Russia is able to make big incursions into the city, and there's nobody to counterattack. There's no counterattacking force. The defenders there are dying. You can't even rotate them out. They've run out of ammunition. They're hungry. They're wounded. And nobody's relieving them. This is the reality of the battlefield throughout the front. It's happening everywhere. I would ask people to go back and study World War II battle. It's called the Collapse of Army Group Center. Took place in the summer of 1944. German Army Group Center, huge group of forces defending the central front on the Eastern Front, and the Russians launched a counterattack, or launched an attack. And the Germans, of course, very effective defenders, are starting to defend, but they didn't have the troops to counterattack, to push back. And eventually the Russians broke them down, the front just collapsed. And that's what we're getting to right now. And you hear the panic in everybody's voice, because everybody sees it in the West. They're going, holy cow. The Ukrainians are becoming so thin that the Russians are going to come through, and there's going to be nothing left to stop them. And at that point in time, Russia pushes up the Dnieper River. Remember Vladimir Putin's story, his speech about history. The left bank is Russia, and that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, many have made predictions that 2025, I believe there's a goal on the Russian side that 2025, this will have been resolved in some form or another. Do you feel like that's the case? Yeah, I'm wondering your thoughts about that, because on the one hand, you have Russia obviously in this commanding position on the battlefield, and also in all sorts of other areas that we have covered here, economically, politically, in terms of its legitimacy. All of this, even its narrative now around Ukraine is widespread, agreed with, or at least validated by most of the world. But at the same time, you still have the United States, you still have NATO, while they have cooled on maybe the official position on Ukraine that they began with and ran with. At the same time, they're not ones to retreat from conflicts unless they're literally running out, like in Afghanistan, where they're literally having to run out with the tails between their legs because they're shaking.
But NATO's never been confronted by a force that they've done there. Look, again, I don't speak for the Russian government. I'm not, despite what people might say, I'm not part of the Russian government. But I have spoken to senior leaders, military and civilian alike, and basically the feeling is that something very major, that the war will enter a completely new phase sometime in May of this year. And I think that what they're talking about is the collapse. And that between May and September, the Russians will make very huge advances, seizing Odessa, Mykolaiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, and that by September, October, this thing's over. Now, what the 2025 figure comes into where Russia's budget. Because Russia, I think, expects that the demilitarization will be accomplished by September of this year. But then you have the issue of denazification, the political aspect of it. And so you have to continue to fund. Plus, Russia has to take into account NATO's overreaction. Not that NATO will get involved, but I can guarantee that with this collapse comes NATO panicking and insisting that they get 300,000 troops up on the Polish border. And that can't happen in a vacuum. So Russia has budgeted for continued military buildup to counter that. But at some point in time, the defeat of Ukraine will be absolute, and the West will have to learn to live with this defeat, with this outcome. It will be sort of the European version of Afghanistan, where at the end of the day, there's nothing they can do. There's literally nothing they can do to change this outcome. Ukraine is being defeated. Ukraine is being destroyed. The NATO gambit has failed. And now NATO will have to fall back and figure out what they're going to do about it. And this is where, Russian diplomacy comes into mind, because right now NATO's talking about Russia talking moving on to Poland, threatening the Baltics. Russia's not going to do any of that. I mean, Russia's not going to sit there and pretend that the Baltics aren't being idiots. They're not going to sit there and pretend that Finland isn't being suicidal and all that. But they're not going to attack Finland. They're not going to attack the Baltics. They're not going to attack Poland. They're not going to attack Romania. What Russia wants to do is bring stability to Europe along the lines of what they proposed back in December of 2021. You remember those two draft treaties, one to NATO, one to the United States, about a new European security framework? Well, you're starting to hear a lot of people in Europe saying, hey, that's not a bad discussion to have with the Russians right now. And I think, for instance, Germany, you've got the inherently contradictory postures of, Bauer, Admiral Bauer, the head of the military commission or whatever it is, German, talking about, we have to prepare for war with Russia, the imminence of war with Russia. Within 20 years, he talks about 20 years. Dude, you're not going to be alive in 20 years. You don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. It shows you the stupidity of that. But the point is, let's say he said within 2 years. How is Germany going to do that? They're deindustrializing as we speak. Their industries are collapsing. They're fleeing the country. Their economy is shrinking. And so in all of this, and it's bringing about, social reaction. The German farmers are in a near revolutionary state right now to bring down the German government. And in this, you suddenly have this lone admiral who's gone insane, talking about war. We have to rebuild. We have to build, a new German army. With patriotic Germans. There are no patriotic Germans, dude. They don't care. They don't share your fantasy. Those Germans aren't running around with the German flag on their shoulder anymore. They're not signing up to join your army or your navy or your air force. So now he's talking about, the German people have to prepare for war, need water and food and radios and batteries and all that. And the German people going, dude, we just want an economy that works. And so I think you're going to see Europe, all of Europe, undergo this transition where the political and economic elite that got them into this position where their economies are collectively collapsing are going to be pushed out of the way, and a new political and economic elite is going to emerge, and I think you're going to see sanity prevail. I mean, what's Germany's quickest route to economic restoration of their economy? Cheap Russian gas. Boom. And I think that's the direction you're headed. So I think Russia's going to exploit that. I do believe that there's maneuver room in the next 5 to 10 years for Russia and Europe to get their act together, to denuclearize. I mean, get those American bombs out of Europe. Don't let bombs go into Poland. Try and stop the bombs going into England. Russia can withdraw their nuclear weapons from Belarus. Maybe a new conventional forces in Europe thing where they start bringing it down, because it's to NATO's advantage. Why spend $300 billion to build up a military that will never be able to stand toe-to-toe with the Russians? meaning attacking Russia. Russia's never going to attack NATO, but so that I think sanity will prevail, and I think that's the posture that Russia's taking. But what Russia can't do is a half measure. What I mean is everything I just talked about sanity prevailing is predicated upon a decisive Russian victory. Europe has to be presented with a reality, a non-negotiable reality. What you see with all of these wishful thinking musings in the media is, for instance, a lot of people saying, we want a stalemate. Well, what's a stalemate? That creates a 38 parallel situation, like the Korean conflict, a frozen conflict, which means that Ukraine, as it currently exists, still exists. This entity called Ukraine, which is a cancer to Russia, still exists. That NATO will flow in weapons by freezing the conflict. Some in NATO believe at that point in time NATO troops can come into Ukraine and create a de facto reality of a NATO, of Ukraine being a NATO member with Article 5 protections of this nature. Russia will never allow that. Russia will never allow a frozen conflict, 38 parallel. This is fantasy. Russia has to solve the Ukrainian problem once and for all. And that means literally the destruction of the modern Ukrainian state as it's currently configured. The absolute elimination of Banderist ideology, this ultranationalism that exists, Ukrainian ultranationalism, has to be purged. It can't be allowed to exist inside Ukraine. It really can't. And Russia has to convince the West to not allow it to exist in diaspora. That's going to be a tough sell in the United States and Canada, but I do think you can get other nations to agree that Banderist ideology should go the way of, Hitler's Nazi ideology. Meaning it should be widely recognized as being evil in nature, destructive to European values, and shouldn't be allowed to exist on European soil. But this can only happen if Russia wins the war decisively, and Russia's on the path of accomplishing this. I mean, that literally, this is the inevitable outcome, unless Putin suddenly has a stroke and decides to negotiate away. That's why Putin will never negotiate. That's why the Russians will never negotiate. Not the way the West or Zelensky wants, because Russia knows it has to have a decisive victory. Russia knows the following, that Crimea will never be secure as long as the Ukrainians control Odessa. And you can thank Great Britain for this. You can thank the British who went in and said it would be very clever for us to build these underwater drones, to give the Ukrainians Storm Shadow missiles, and to use Odessa as a launching pad to attack the Crimean Peninsula, to attack Feodosia, to attack Sevastopol. You got some PR moments. Oh, boom, you blew up the bridge. Oh, boom, you blew up a boat. Oh, boom. Well, what you did, England, is you cost Ukraine Odessa and the Black Sea coast. You ensured that the future Ukraine will be nothing but an agricultural rump state, landlocked, because you decided to score stupid tactical points without thinking about the larger strategic picture. So England has cost Ukraine Odessa, and if Russia's taken Odessa, it's taken Mykolaiv. End of story. You can't have Odessa without Mykolaiv. And if you take Mykolaiv, you have to take the rest of the left bank of the Dnieper, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kharkov. It's over. That's what's going to happen. There's nothing going to change that. And that's the reality the West is going to have to learn to deal with.
Yeah, yes, indeed. I think all of that certainly is playing out and will play out in the coming days, weeks, months, dare I say, years. Scott, I wanted to transition quickly to maybe a couple more stories. One, of course, is what's happening in Gaza. So Israel is on the assault, on the offensive, you could say, as they have been for many months now. This time targeting Rafah. So during the Super Bowl, many folks were talking about interesting X had trending Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback, and at the same time, more people were tweeting about Rafah, but Mahomes was trending first, so it shows a little bit of a bias there. But this has been going on, an intensified bombing campaign. There is talks about a ground operation in Rafah, this small village packed like Palestinians are packed like sardines here because they've been displaced from every other area, bombed, all along the route to Rafah, now being on in Rafah. Many have been killed. The numbers, I think, are an undercount likely coming out of the pages of the New York Times. But you have William Burns and other players in the international realm, Arab countries, Qatar, etc., trying to work out a ceasefire deal, and there is none in sight. Not only this, but you have Josep Borrell, our favorite person in the European Union. He, the EU so-called foreign policy chief, he has come out publicly and said Netanyahu just doesn't listen anyway, so he's not really going to listen. So, Scott, your reaction to all the latest updates in Gaza and the larger Middle East situation that is being, of course, fueled by the U.S. and Israel?
Well, I mean, wow, where to start on this one? Do we start with a 4-year-old girl on a telephone to the Palestinian 911, saying that she's in a car? They'd already listened to her 15-year-old cousin phone in live and then be murdered by the Israelis. You hear the machine gun fire, you hear the bullets hitting her body, and she's dead. So now this 4-year-old girl calls in and then she says, somebody come and save me, somebody come and save me. And then they send 2 paramedics. They coordinated with the Israelis and said, we're sending 2 paramedics. The Israelis said, okay. They did everything the Israelis asked them to do. When the paramedics arrived on the scene, they were then killed by the Israelis. Their vehicle run over, set on fire, the body's burned, and the 4-year-old girl is dead. Is this where we begin, where the Israelis are using 4-year-old children as live bait to lure in paramedics to murder them? It's not unique. The Israelis do this over and over again. How about the doctor who's in surgery and the Israeli sniper shoots him while he's in surgery? How about the people trying to arrive at a hospital for medical care that are shot? The mother taking her child across the road, shot. The child wounded. This happens on a daily basis. This is literal genocide being carried out by the Israelis. It's murder of the most egregious form. And and then what we talk about, Patrick Mahomes. Look, I watched the Super Bowl. I'm not a hypocrite. I mean, I watched it. I wanted to watch it. I've been waiting for this sporting event. But I also understood that, while that was happening, what was going on in Rafah, was it done deliberately? I think so. I think the Israelis timed it so that America is distracted, so that the news cycle couldn't be generated. Because what they did was horrible. The Israelis have been dropping leaflets on the civilian population of Gaza, telling them to go to Rafah. That's where they'll be safe. So about 1.6 million of the Palestinians did go to Rafah. They're crammed in there. And now the Israelis start to take down the hospitals, attack the schools. And last night they bombed a mosque. And they killed hundreds of people. I mean, they ripped their bodies apart. We're talking about women, children, civilians. They dropped the bomb. They claimed it was in support of an anti-terrorist operation that rescued 2 Israeli hostages. Well, let me put it this way. Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 are the 2 American preeminent hostage rescue forces in the military. Then there's the FBI's hostage rescue team. If they ran an operation where to rescue 2 hostages, they had to kill nearly 150 people, wound another 250 people, and kill 3 hostages, maybe 8 hostages total. There's 5 that are wounded. No one would call that a success. In fact, if you put those parameters out there, if you brief those parameters saying, Mr. President, we're going to launch a raid. When it's done, we'll have murdered 150 civilians, 200 wounded. We'll get 2 hostages back, but 3 are going to die and 5 more are going to be wounded, probably dead. The president would say, you're not doing the operation. It isn't going to happen. So that's a failure. The Israelis are calling this a success. It's not a success. It's murder, mass murder. The Israelis are getting away with it. Nobody's stopping them. Nobody. Not the United States. The United States is the only nation that could stop them. We're not. The Egyptians, I mean, they're talking tough. We're going to rip up the Camp David Accords. We're moving 40 tanks to the border. We're moving air defense to the border. But you really think Egypt's going to throw away the golden egg that's been laid to them by Camp David, the deal where their military aid and their aid from the United States is directly linked to the aid that the United States gives to Israel? So Egypt isn't going to encourage the United States to stop giving aid to Israel because that affects their money. Egypt isn't going to rip up the Camp David Accords because that affects their money. That's their wealth. Egypt has never cared about the Palestinian people. One of the reasons why life in Gaza sucks so bad is that Egypt has been colluding with Israel to seal it off. And suddenly the world's saying it's up to Egypt to save the day. Egypt's not going to save the day. No one cares about the Palestinian people. Jordanians don't. Hell, the king of Jordan was in the White House the other day, Super Bowl Sunday, and I was waiting for the what's that movie, Love Actually, the big Christmas movie where Hugh Grant's the British prime minister, and he has this scene where he's doing a press conference with the American president, and he just tells him off. You're not a friend. Boom, boom. I keep waiting for the Love Actually moment for somebody, some world leader of stature, to sit there with Tony Blinken or the president or some American official and say, no, you suck. No, we're not doing this anymore. We're done. You're bad. You're not a friend. This isn't how it's going to operate. But nobody ever does it because that's Hollywood. That's fantasy. That's what people actually have a moral, that have a spine and moral courage. There's no moral leader out there. Saudi Arabia is making noises, but they're not going to do anything. Turkey's making noises, but they're not going to do anything. Iran, they're not going to do anything. Hezbollah, they're not going to do anything. I think the Palestinian people, the only hope they have is Hamas. Hamas continue to resist. And by doing so, by exposing the criminal nature of Israel, to create a reaction, to continue this reaction around the world, because the United States is never going to do the right thing in Palestine because of the Palestinian people. We don't care about that. We just proved it. Super Bowl Sunday. We were silent while 150 women and children were blown into tiny little pieces by the Israelis. We were silent. We didn't do anything. But we do care about the global South turning their back on us. This is what hurts. This is where American ambassadors are writing in saying, hey, we're losing the world. In October, we have the BRICS forum meeting in Kazan, in Russia, under Russian leadership. And BRICS is going to start becoming, first of all, they doubled in size from 5 to 10. The 10 new members are going to be there. They're going to talk about increasing the expansion, but they're going to start creating institutions that replicate what the G7 does, what the G20 does, institutions that allow now for foreign policy and economic policy to be coordinated amongst the BRICS members. BRICS is the global South. And so as Russia starts attracting the global South is taking a look at the United States saying, we don't want to have any part of this. You guys are horrible, what you did here. And that could be the impetus for the United States to do the right thing and stop Israel. Look, as long as we allow Benjamin Netanyahu to stay in power, and remember, we allow this to happen. We could terminate him today, right now. The president could pick up the phone and say, Bibi, you're done. You can't get rid of a sovereign state. Well, you ain't sovereign enough because we will stop all the money. We will pull the plug on every deal we have. We will force AIPAC to register as a foreign agent. We will do a whole bunch of stuff that you don't want us to do, that none of your colleagues want us to do, if you don't step down. We could make him step down today, right now, but we don't, because we don't have the guts, we don't have the cojones to do that. But we might once the global South says, we're done. And BRICS is the leverage. BRICS is the leverage. So if Hamas can continue to hold out, continue to deny Israel military victory, and by resisting, and by the world seeing the crimes of Israel against the Palestinian people become even more politically relevant. Look, the Biden doctrine, I don't know, did you read the Tom Friedman piece in the New York Times about the new, Biden doctrine? It talks about a new Palestinian state. We really have to fight for it. Tom, you used an interesting word, demilitarized. How can you talk about a sovereign Palestinian state that's demilitarized? So what does demilitarized mean? It means that Hamas, who has won this great victory by withstanding the Israeli onslaught, has to step aside. That isn't going to happen. So, I don't think it's all over for the Palestinians. But I'm telling you right now, Anybody who thinks that the Egyptians are going to be the cavalry, that the Jordanians are going to be the cavalry, that Saudi Arabia is going to do the right thing, you're waiting in vain. This is Hamas's fight. Maybe Hezbollah will step up to the plate. I don't know. They promise, but remember, Hezbollah is a political party, not just a resistance militia. It's a political party that has to take care of Lebanon. And I think, Nasrallah understands that, while on the ground, Hezbollah can fight the Israelis to a standstill, even take the initiative, maybe seize the Galilee, that Israel will blow the living hell out of Beirut, blow the living hell out of Lebanon. And that creates a dangerous situation for Hezbollah, because right now Hezbollah is a party that has a reputation of being good at governance, meaning that they care for all of Lebanon. And if they get involved in a war with Israel that causes Lebanon, who right now is in precarious economic condition, political condition, to be destroyed, then that puts the future of Hezbollah at risk. Everybody looks out for their own best interest. Nobody's willing to sacrifice themselves for the Palestinian people. So at the end of the day, the only hope Palestine has is the continued resilience of its population and the ability of Hamas to hold out.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, too, what you brought up, Scott, about the varying reasons for inaction regionally. We've talked about on this program, of course, Ansar Allah, the Houthis, their heroic stand, which continues, although it's not front page news anymore, but that blockade continues. It's what they can do. And I think you bring up a good point about the axis of resistance. I mean, you talked about a powder keg. Israel is not a stranger to potentially invading and bombing and laying waste to large segments of Lebanon. Syria knows what it's like to be under fire from Israel, because it is almost every other day in some capacity. Iran also understands its role and its position and what it means to be the top dog in that region for the United States and the West to eventually get to. We saw that earlier when you were on the program, and we talked about the potential for war with Iran. There are influential segments of the U.S. political class that truly do want that. So it is a powder keg for the axis of resistance side, and then with the other side, the maybe more compliant Arab countries or regional countries. I think this was underestimated maybe at the beginning. I think many people thought the situation is so dire. So yeah, of course, Saudi Arabia and Jordan, they will take a stronger stance. But at the same time, many of these countries have been so deeply connected to, especially the United States, not to mention the growing ties with Israel, but especially the U.S.'s influence that remains, even if there's BRICS and all these great developments. It doesn't mean that something as sensitive as the Palestine question, something that is so monumental, would change the entire region. What happens there will change the entire region. So Saudi Arabia, Jordan, these countries, their leadership, they feel like that would be political suicide for them. What are the consequences? They're not thinking about the Palestinians. They're thinking about themselves. And so I think, you bring up a really great point there, but I'll kick it back to you if you have anything that you want to add to the situation for Gaza and Palestine.
Well, I don't want to say that the axis of resistance is feckless, because clearly they're not. We see Hezbollah engaged in a continuous pressure, escalation of pressure on Israel along its border. And Hezbollah has taken some losses, and they've inflicted serious losses on the Israelis. But again, I think to step into war, this existential conflict, is a huge step. And I'm not saying it's impossible for Hezbollah to do that, but I'm saying that Hezbollah will not gladly go in that direction. Neither will Iran. Remember, Iran just normalized relations with Saudi Arabia. Both Saudi Arabia and Iran are now members of BRICS. Iran is pivoting its economy for the first time in many decades. They've been able to get their economy positioned to overcome the strains put on it by U.S.-led sanctions, Western sanctions. And so, for the Iranian people who've been promised this moment for decades, this Now it's time for Iran to flourish and to thrive, and for them to have this economic, well-being that has been promised. For Iran to throw it all away, because while the United States won't be able to defeat Iran, we can seriously blow up a lot of Iranian infrastructure, and we can set Iran back economically. And that creates the potential for domestic unrest. Every regime has to look out for its own best interests. And while the Iranians aren't going to be defeated by an American flotilla or American army, there is the possibility that unrest can happen from within. Now, people who study Iran, I'm one of them. I tend to believe that there's a lot more resilience in the theocracy than the West gives it credit for. But it's still a gamble, and it's one that Iran doesn't want to take. The people have been promised a better life, and so Iran will hesitate before throwing the dice down on the table and engaging decisively with Israel and the United States in a manner that will trigger a response, a military response, which, while it won't defeat Iran, will hurt Iran. So I think there's a lot of hesitancy out there right now. The Houthi are about the only ones who basically said,
nothing to lose. Nothing to lose.
We've been doing this since 2014. We don't care. We're doing the right thing here. But the Houthi, they have limitations about what they can achieve. And they will need Iranian support. If they're to escalate, Iran will have to provide them newer generation of weaponry, etc. I'm just basically, again, it comes down to the pressure that can be put. There will not be a ceasefire as long as Netanyahu is the prime minister. I firmly believe that, because he's equated a ceasefire with Israeli defeat. So as long as Netanyahu holds on to power, you're going to be seeing a continued escalation of military thought. But even he understands that to trigger a conflict with Hezbollah would be not only devastating for Lebanon, but also for Israel, that he would pay the price. So I think this selfish self-interest, which is the prerogative of every sovereign state, is the one thing that's going to prevent this thing from exploding out of control. What Netanyahu is hoping for is that the Palestinian people crack for the international support for Palestine becomes so great that the United States compels him to step aside. So we're in that kind of race. It's very risky. I mean, it's literally like they emptied out powder kegs, and you've got a bunch of books and matches there, and a bunch of arson inclined kids flipping matches around. Match connects with the gunpowder, it's going up. But I do believe that there's enough adults in the room that understand the consequences of that, and they'll manage this escalation so it doesn't get to that route. But the tragedy is 4-year-old Palestinian girls are going to be getting on the phone, calling in for help, and help is never going to arrive, because the Israelis are murderous sons of bitches who are committing the most horrific war crimes imaginable, and nobody in the world cares.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine also the decisions that you're talking about being made that where we can't be a party to, right? The decision for Iran or Hezbollah, these countries which there's a massive popular sentiment, not just worldwide, but it's been like this in the region for quite some time, a massive popular sentiment in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And with something like this going on, this literal genocide, to have to walk the line, toe the line, do only what is possible, but may not change the calculus of what's going on. I mean, I can't imagine what it must be like to be in that situation. And at the same time, I think you're right. It's so interesting. It feels like the axis of resistance has been the force that has been preventing the powder keg from exploding, while Israel, of course the United States, has been lighting all the matches everywhere. And so it's been very interesting to watch that. And now, and maybe last question on this, now you have William Burns there. And Scott, you know intelligence. He's there, of course. He's known also as sort of more of a diplomatic character when it comes to intelligence operatives, leaders. Could you talk about what possibly he could be talking about raising here, given the fact that all the reports are saying, yes, exactly what you're saying, Scott. Netanyahu, Israel, there's no progress there. Hamas, there's lots of progress. They were willing, as long as certain terms were met that are very meetable, very achievable. Like, for example, the cessation and withdrawal of hostile military forces in Gaza. That seems to be achievable. There's no gain here. So William Burns has been there for, I believe it's been over a day at least. What do you think he's saying? What do you think is going on there in terms of from the intelligence perspective?
Well, he was brought in as the director of CIA not because of his extensive intelligence background. He doesn't have one. He's a diplomat. He was a very successful ambassador to Russia. He's the man who wrote the 2008 Yet Means Yet memorandum, no means no, about the dangers of inviting Ukraine into NATO, the inevitability of conflict with Russia that would produce. He has a reputation. They call him, the master of the back channel. In fact, he wrote a book called The Back Channel, which is sort of his autobiography about the role that he played in doing these kind of back channel deals. And so he was brought in because the CIA in the Middle East has a role that goes beyond simple espionage or intelligence work. Especially with the Israelis and the Palestinians, the CIA became the trusted broker between the two, where a CIA officer could meet with the PLO, meet with Fatah, and then go and meet with Amman, meet with Mossad, and get the security services to work with one another. The CIA actually built up a reputation and a body, a pool of manpower that had this experience. And so I think that's the role that he's playing right now. His job right now is to get the security services, because security services at the end of the day, they always talk to each other, no matter what. I mean, I was laughing. I was not laughing. Yeah, I was laughing about the Battle of Mariupol. I was speaking to Adam Delonkanov, the Chechen commander of the Chechen forces in Mariupol, and he talked about how he was in open radio contact with Budanov, the head of the Ukrainian military and intelligence, that they would coordinate with each other, talk to each other. And he said, Budanov's actually a pretty smart guy, a pretty capable guy, but you couldn't imagine, this, but it happened. The intelligence people, the security people, are always talking to each other because that's their job. And so I think Burns is there, trying to work the back channel, trying to, come up with a solution that's, we're not going to read about it, because the purpose of the back channel isn't to make headlines. The purpose of the back channel is to quietly go in there and get the ball rolling, get people talking, get things happening. Can he succeed? It's a big problem, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If Netanyahu stays in power, then there's no chance for a ceasefire. And the only way you're going to bring a peaceful conclusion to this is through a ceasefire. So, what kind of deals can Burns cut? What kind of assurances can he give? At the end of the day, he's going to be limited by Israel, by Netanyahu, and so we'll have to see. I think everybody that he's talking to could make the kind of compromises necessary to get a ceasefire, a lasting ceasefire in place, by punting down the road some of the more difficult issues, like what's the final status of Hamas politically, what's the final status of Hamas militarily. These are two, so-called game. The game doesn't go on if they're still there, but you can't make them go away when they're winning on the ground, when they're defeating the Israeli military, and when the Hamas is more popular politically than they've ever been. So I think Burns' job is to go in there and create carve-outs and say, okay, this is an issue that we push down the road. This is another issue we push down the road. But what we need to do is get enough concurrence on issues we can agree upon so we can get a ceasefire, get the hostages exchanged for prisoners, and get humanitarian aid in, and bring the temperature down, tremendously about on this problem. And then once we do that, we shifted away from the battlefield to, how do we deal now with these cutouts that have been identified, and then he can step aside and let the diplomats take over. But I think that's his job. His job right now is to shape the political battlefield so that there can be a ceasefire as soon as possible.
Well, Scott, I kept you a while, and I want to be respectful of your time. And so perhaps we can close now. One last thing, a Patreon member, if you could just, maybe in a minute or less, or I know on U.S. Tour of Duty, your program, Ask the Inspector, you do very short answers to viewer questions. Yes, I have a Patreon member question from Fahim. And so, folks, if you want to subscribe on Patreon, you can submit questions, guest suggestions, etc. Find that link in the video description. But the question is, and I know you like this question, so it might be hard to answer in just a minute or two, but do you think that Putin went over history so extensively because he knows that Americans' version of history is what happened just an hour ago, and it's important for Americans to understand the historical context? Do you feel like that was an underlying motivation for his focus on history, especially in the beginning?
Well, again, I'm loath to speak on behalf of the Russian president and presume that I know why he did, and et cetera. But what I will say is this: as somebody who studied the Russian president, every word he speaks is important, whether he's swearing or whether he's talking history. He is very careful in what he says, and he understands that words have meaning, and when a president of Russia says words, that people are listening, and he is careful not to put himself in a situation where he overcommits verbally or he understates. Everything is precise. It's done for a reason, and so there's a reason why he did that. And the reasons don't have to be. The thing about Vladimir Putin is he's a man capable of complex thoughts. So the reason doesn't just have to be to throw Tucker Carlson off. I mean, that's a desired outcome, but the substance of the words still matter. And so he was committing to a historic narrative that he wanted not just America, but the world, and to, frankly speaking, the Russian people to hear. He's also speaking to the Russian people. Every time he speaks, he's speaking to the Russian people. He treats them with that kind of respect. And so he's putting forward a narrative saying, this is the vision that I, the leader of the Russian nation, have from a historic standpoint. I'm committing to this narrative, and, people need to be aware of that. So I think also the Russian people, and I probably shouldn't read your chat, but I know you have some Russians in your chat right now, and we'll see if they agree with me or not. But the Russian people know Russian history, so they're able to read into the lesson that Putin is giving. They go, oh, he's talking about left wing, right wing. He's talking about Ukraine, Russia, new Russia, and all that stuff. And the Russian people go, okay, we get it, we understand, because he hasn't been articulating an in-game strategy. I saw that when I was over there. People kept saying, how's it going to end? I said, don't ask me, ask the Russian government. The Russian government's the only one who can articulate, how this thing ends. That's a question that goes to the Russian government. The fact that you don't know the answer means the Russian government hasn't adequately communicated that to you. So I think what Vladimir Putin was doing was laying the foundation for this larger discussion of, how this war will end, what an end game looks like. So I think every word he spoke during this interview with Tucker Carlson carried weight, and I think it was spoken for a reason. Again, you can address different audiences. Like I said, I think he was addressing an American audience. If that was addressing a European audience, he's addressing a Russian audience. Every word mattered, and that's hopefully another takeaway that people have is you don't have to love Vladimir Putin. You don't have to run around with a Team Putin T-shirt or any of that kind of stuff. But respect the guy. And, respect the fact that he believes in what he's doing, that his belief is founded in fact, and respect, how he defines himself. There's a lot of people out there trying to define Russia. Well, that's fine and dandy. He spoke of the Russian soul. And my challenge to every American listening, everybody in the world, is why don't you go on a journey of trying to define what the Russian soul is? And if you do that, you might actually begin to understand Russian perspective. John F. Kennedy gave a speech at American University in June of 1963. It's a famous speech. And one of the things that he said in the speech is that, we're in the Cold War, we had just gone through the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he said, it's imperative. We don't have to embrace what the Soviets are saying. We don't have to agree with what they're doing. But we do have to put ourselves in their shoes so we understand where they're coming from. What their perspective is. We have to respect that. I think Vladimir Putin basically, through this presentation, put down a giant pair of moccasins and said, jump on in, guys. Feel what it's like to be a Russian. Try to understand this. Try to understand our perspective. And anybody who takes the time and effort to do that will be better positioned to understand what the best way forward is for the United States and Russia in terms of resolving the many issues that confront us today.
Yeah, indeed. And I forgot to mention, I'll just mention it briefly from earlier, the way when he was speaking to an American audience, I felt like every time he said something like, "Oh, Tucker, the time, you applied for the CIA. Oh, who blew up Nord Stream? You did. Oh, who, what's my response to China being the new colonizer? Oh, that's a boogeyman story. You're hurting yourself." He wasn't saying Tucker Carlson, although, I think Tucker Carlson at that time, like with the Nord Stream situation, took it like a champ and made good humor out of it. But I think what Putin was doing was saying, you as an American, the U.S., making that disconnection because, I think we have a situation where many Americans, whether they are doing this intentionally or maybe they're not thinking about it, they do identify with the U.S. government's actions. They don't agree with everything. They certainly don't even pay attention to everything. They don't think everything matters. But at the same time, done in the name of Americans, people in the United States. So I thought that was also just brilliant. You, not the U.S. government, because if you had done that, then you take out the then you shift the audience. Then he's talking to the U.S. government, and also and not to mention that is provocative too. That would be considered, a slander attack, and then you'd have the mainstream media being able to go, with report after report after report about how Putin spoke like this and made threats. You see it now with the whole NATO Trump comments, right? Trump said this thing about NATO that he's literally been saying every single day of his political career since the 2016 campaign. But now it's this huge thing because he said it. He said Russia can do whatever it wants, right? So anything. So they were looking for that. He didn't give them any ammunition at all. They couldn't even put words in the mouth. But yet he still spoke to Americans. So I thought that was, I don't know, pretty. I thought
one of the underappreciated parts of his presentation too was the lecture he gave us on dollar policy and how America's committing economic suicide with that. I hope that every American listened to that and understand that these guys are 100% correct, that we slit our own throat. De-dollarization could not have occurred. I'm just being frank. The power of the dollar was absolute, and de-dollarization would never occur unless we created the conditions by delegitimizing, this American control over the global economy. Why would anybody want to use the dollar as the reserve currency when the United States at any time can seize, say, $300 billion of your
Which they're still talking about. They're talking about now. They're still talking about.
I'm Vietnam, and I got I go, well, wait a minute. So you're telling me that if I ever do anything that the United States Congress isn't happy about, you can just seize my money in your system? I don't like that. Hey, BRICS, you going to come up with an alternative? Yeah, we think we will. I'm going that way. Here's your dollars back. We don't want it. I mean, and this is what we've done. And Putin, you can see the exasperation in his face because he's sitting there going, why are you doing this? This really makes sense. You know?
Right, the eyes. You can see what sense does this make? It's only going to hurt the United States. And he outlined very clearly, just in terms of Russian trade, Russia-China trade, as just one example, because this is just happening all across the board, whether we're talking about China, UAE, or any other instance, especially amongst global South countries, and the BRICS countries, the rising emerging economies in the global South, that they are all making moves toward currency swaps, bilateral trade being transitioned into their national currencies. Like that's the
Things that are,
you're exactly right.
Economically inefficient. I mean, they're losing money doing this.
Right.
The dollar was very big. And the other thing is, I just don't understand the United States Senate. I mean, I really don't. But we made so much money off of having the dollar as the convenience to the United States of the dollar being the global currency of choice. Was a tremendous multi-$100 billion plus, economic advantage. We're throwing it away. It's literally like, how can we guarantee the collapse of the American economy in the shortest time frame possible? Why don't we do everything we can to get the world to turn their back on the U.S. dollar? And we did it. And so, I mean, this is insane. In the rest of the world, nobody would have said, I'm willing to take the hit, the cost of currency transactions, the inefficiency of this design, currency swaps, etc. The only reason they're doing that is because the United States has made it impossible for them to continue to be involved with the dollar. The United States Senate, really, if you guys want to do something good for whatever happens to you in the election, pass a law that says in the United States that you're not going to ever sanction people again. Sanctions are stupid. Pass a law that preserves the integrity of the dollar being the global reserve currency of choice. Create a system that protects people who use the dollar. And then, and only then, we might be able to get some people to say, like in BRICS, I mean, it would be nice if we did that before October, so that people in BRICS go, hey, wait a minute, stop. Before we talk about taking this big step of dumping the dollar, America just did something smart. They're making the dollar attractive again. Can we get it in writing in America? Can BRICS now turn to America and say, get it in writing? No more denial of SWIFT system, no more things like that. And if they do that, I think a lot of people, even the Saudis, will say, all right, yeah, we'll go back to the dollar as the petrol currency, because we know how that works. We know that it can work. We know how efficient it can be. But they can't do it if America is going to use that. Marco Rubio, who I despise, had a moment of honesty a while back when he was talking about Brazil. And Brazil was talking about de-dollarization. They were talking about doing transactions in other currencies. He said, we can't allow this to happen. He said, because if Brazil dumps the dollar, then we won't be able to control the Brazilian economy through sanctions. I'm like, that's the whole idea, Marco. And the fact that you want to control the Brazilian economy through sanctions is the greatest reason the Brazilians can ever have to dump the dollar. Whereas if you said, our job is
Hey, Dragon, what's up, bro?
through sanctions, our job is to ensure that the dollar is a stable currency for global commerce. So that's our number one driving economic factor. Keep the dollar as the most stable, viable currency for international commerce. But that's not the goal. We have to control the world. And as a result, we're going to lose the mechanism that gives us that control, the U.S. dollar.
Yeah. Yeah, and it comes out of, I mean, it not only is it a losing venture, a losing policy, but it comes out of desperation, because it's obviously coming out of a need to control Brazil's economy Sure. Yes. These are how people think. And at the same time, the reality is, at least, what isn't just abstract, is that this is directed toward very particular countries that the United States wants, obviously, to control, and they can't do it. And so it's gone to the point where they've turned to every, there's a toolbox. They've opened up the whole tool. They poured all the tools out, and they said, all right, let's throw the wrench at Russia. And that you don't throw wrenches. So that's the thing. It's that they're throwing everything they can at countries that are rising, that they can't control, and it's backfiring big time, because this was never going to end well if it means that you have to sacrifice economic stability or even economic influence for that very goal. Because the very goal of controlling a country like Russia, China, getting them to fall, destabilize them, weaken them, that's exactly what you're trying to do. So it's an interesting dynamic that I think is going to continue to play out on the world stage for some time to come, and I'm glad, Scott, that you are willing to spend your time with me to go over these things. So appreciate your time. I think it's time to close up, though. We've been here for a couple hours. So, Scott, I have your ScottRunnerExtra.com in the video description. Do you want any parting words before we head out of here on what people can expect? I know that you have an interview out. Maybe you can talk about some of those things, and then we'll head out of here.
Yeah, when I was in Russia, I had an opportunity to interview Alexander Khodorkovsky, the commander of the Vostok Battalion, like the Vostok Brigade. But this is, he's a former commander of the Ukrainian Alpha Group, forces. And after Maidan, he and many of his soldiers basically said they don't support the ultranationalists, and they went to the Donbass and took up arms against the Ukrainian government. He's been fighting this fight since 2014. One of the most experienced commanders out there. When I was preparing for the interview, because I did prepare, I was ready to have a conversation about drones and about artillery and about the modern, face of war, etc. We ended up having a very philosophical discussion about U.S.-Russian relations, and it's one of the more interesting interviews I've ever done. It was more like a conversation.
Right.
And so I would encourage people to go on my Substack. I published a short article that introduces that interview, and then you can watch the interview. I've also put it out on Rumble and YouTube. But I think people would find that interview very interesting. And I continue. I wrote an article before I went to Russia on my Substack, Sympathy for the Devil, Part 1, when I basically introduced the concept of good versus evil in the world today, and how it influences individual decisions and the decisions of government. Part 2 is hopefully coming out on Friday, and I think I don't want to give away too much, but let's just say that the face of evil looks an awful like Benjamin Netanyahu, the face of the devil. So we'll see what happens. So yeah, that to look forward to. But again, everything, all interviews I do, everything I write, can be found on ScottRunnerExtra.com. Oh, and I'll give you one last piece of news. Roger Waters was kind enough to allow me to use his song "Two Suns in the Sunset" for my documentary film. And so we're going to be producing a trailer for the movie. We're finalizing that based upon that song, and so hopefully in the not too distant future, the movie trailer will be out. People can watch that as well.
Well, we'll have to maybe get you and Roger on a stream or something, talking about that film. ScottRunnerExtra.com. You can also donate to Waging Peace, the documentary that you are referring to. So everyone, good night. Go to the video description before you leave here. Patreon, Substack, PayPal, buy me a coffee, wherever you want to support. It's very much appreciated. Hit that like button before you go. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. And I will return soon. Thanks again, Scott, for joining me, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye-bye.
we got to do it better than that. That's better. Subcommittee on Federal Lands will come to order. I'm assuming the mic is on here. It sounds like it's good, huh? I'd like to welcome everybody to Cochise College here in Sierra Vista, Arizona. And let's see here. Yeah, thank you to Dr.
Hello, everybody.
All right, guys, it's 5. I just want to come on for a little bit. I'm tired. I'm going to go to sleep right now. I will check you guys all tomorrow. The girls are going to do a Valentine's stream in the midday. So you guys can catch me on Empress Now's channel. You guys see the YouTube channel right there. Head over there, subscribe. And it's going to be chilling, eating chocolates, talking about relationships. The best way to get a good woman and how to keep her on your squad. All that other jazz. I'm actually dead tired. So I will check you guys all later. Deuces.
I'm Empress Nile. I manage and direct the Valkyries of Arcadia. The Valkyries of Arcadia, we are a multi-talented pop icon gaming group. Each Valkyrie has specific talents. For example, we have Hasari, she's our dance coordinator. We have Kwanai, she's our songbird, she sings. We have Silva Neko, she's into cosplay, graphic design, and she handles that part for the Valkyries. And we have Alicia, who is into fitness and wellness. The organization started around 20 years ago when Empire Arcadia, the company, was formed. The Valkyries of Arcadia is the female division. Anime, I wouldn't say is our main focus because we are multi-talented and we do focus on many things, but we do go to events like Anime Comfest, which has a multitude of different things there. For example, I host our annual Just Dance Off esports tournament every year. And also we do cosplay and we do different activities for people to enjoy. I don't only manage and direct, but I also do host events. For example, our Valkyrie retreats. That's where we either go to a private pool and hang out there, or we go out for sushi at East Japanese, and then we come back and end the day with our branded gaming streams. For example, we have Bed Lounge Game and Chat, which I stream on YouTube and Trovo. There we dress all cute and sexy in bed while having fun streaming our favorite video games. It is literally my life. It's work, but it's also very fun. I work in the television entertainment industry, where I also perform in music videos. I host entertainment shows, and I was also the host for Jamaica's only video game TV show, the Lab Video Game TV. I'm also currently working on the Valkyries' very own reality TV show for Jamaica. There you can get a real inside look into how we live our lives. So it's real. This is real. Jamaica is slowly opening up to anime pop culture on a whole. A few years ago, it would be seen as little pitney something, go take up your book. But now, thanks to the internet and outside influence, of course, people are seeing that it's more of a career. It can be a very viable part, and Jamaica is also so rich in culture. So if we could mesh our culture with pop culture, anime, thanks to Anime Comfest and other events like that, Jamaican public are slowly opening up to it. And what I would like to see more of, we're kind of already doing it because people are opening up to anime we're fine walking out in public in our cosplay so far. They're opening up. And the only thing I would like to change is the speed, but it is happening. Looking good is also a part of the job, which is why I'm an ambassador and a model for the digital, international, and print product of Jamaica magazine. Yeah, we even got our own exclusive magazine. You can find me pretty much everywhere on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all the socials at Empress Nile. That's EMPR3SS Nile.